Hello, 911. I'd like to report a murder. The Falcons just got killed by the Chicago Bears 37-17.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. And guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for far too long, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that makes this illustrious podcast your first listen. Shout out to the everydayers. You guys have supported me over this past calendar year in 2023 as usual, and I appreciate your support. And I hope that you have a great 2024, even if the Falcons don't provide it. But all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's postcast rapid reaction is going to be similar to the postcast that you may have heard me on the Locked On Sports Atlanta live after the show. We're going to cover a lot of the same topics. I had to solo that with Tanitra and Jarvis being out. Hopefully we'll have less coughing due to COVID on today's rapid reaction here on Locked On Falcons. So I won't make any promises there, but we'll talk about Arthur Smith's job status. We'll talk about the future of the Falcons quarterback situation, and we'll talk about why they lost. And we'll start there with the Falcons, no showing this game. And that's going to potentially have dire consequences. We're going to talk about Arthur Smith's job status. Earlier, after last week's win against the Colts, I was like, yeah, he's like 94% likely to be back next year. I'm not going to give a percentage on it today. We'll talk about that later. But like the reason why the Falcons lost was because they got absolutely annihilated by DJ Moore in this game. Like that, if you want to boil it down to one thing, they couldn't stop DJ Moore. He had like 9 catches, 159 yards, 5 20+ yard plays. On that postcast, I basically said it was like a Tyreek Hill type of performance from DJ Moore. There were multiple drives in this game where it started off with a big play from DJ Moore, right? And then on pretty much, it seemed like every drive where you didn't get that big play on DJ Moore on first down, the first third down of that series, like a 3rd and 8 or whatever, they would get an explosive play. So it's like, hey, just keep feeding that guy because the Falcons have no way to stop him, right? And that's where, we're going to play the blame game on why the Falcons lost. And it's like, this is on Arthur Blank, or this is on Arthur Smith, or this is on Ryan Nielsen, this is on Taylor Hyatt, whatever. Right. But ultimately, the game boiled down to like, why did the Falcons lose on the football field? Because they couldn't stop DJ Moore and they couldn't stop giving up explosive plays. 9+ 20-yard plays given up in this game by the Falcons defense. And when the Falcons fell into that whole 14-0 with the Bears scoring on their 2 opening drives, right? And then, they were on they were down 21-7 going into halftime, then 24-7 at the beginning, at the second half after the Bears got a field goal drive. Like the Falcons don't have the firepower to claw their way back into the football game, right? Their only explosive play, I think, in the second half was a 24-yard touchdown run by Taylor Heineke, right? And I know a lot of people are like, hey, the reason why the Falcons can't come back in games is because they have bad play calling, which certainly I think is a factor, right? We've been talking since Arthur Smith's, the day he was hired, about is he good at dialing up explosive plays? And the question so far through 3 years is not really. But at the same time, the Falcons don't really have the personnel to really be this explosive team because their most explosive weapon this year has been Drake London on like 50-50 balls down the field. And they tried a deep shot to Kyle Pitts that Heineke missed in the end zone that could have, opened this game wide open on I think that opening drive. But they've tried those deep shots to Kyle Pitts all year long. They haven't been connecting on them for 2 years. Maybe, right? With Kyle Pitts healthier next year, maybe they start connecting on some of those go balls and fades and whatnot that they were doing in his rookie year, but we'll see. But this team's entire identity is wrapped around their run game and their defense. And their run game was mostly a non-factor, as we thought it probably would be, going up against arguably the league's, depending on what metric you look at, arguably the league's best run defense. Bijan had a couple of nice runs in this game. He had a 21-yard run on like the second play of the game, right? The Falcons got 43 yards on their first two plays, two explosive plays. You're like, okay, this is different for the Falcons. And then it was like pretty much nothing after that, right? They got a couple more explosive plays, don't get me wrong. But it was just like, that was the outlier as opposed to the norm, right? But most of their success running the football was like on Heineke scrambles. And then, of course, the defense got annihilated. So, like, the two sort of building pillars of your identity, were not effective in this game. And the Falcons just don't have a lot to offer other than that. And I know that's disappointing to a lot of folks because they look at, hey, we've invested all these premium resources in terms of top 10 draft picks on offensive weapons. And you're sitting here telling me on the podcast, Aaron, that they're not good enough. Isn't that an indictment of this regime? Sure, if you want to take it that way, but the truth of the matter is, like, they're not good enough, guys. Like, they're good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying London and Pitts and Robinson are trash. They're all key building block players for this football team, but without the quarterback, without more explosive, like, it's going to be a priority, guys. You're going to see a lot of mock drafts that are basically going to be quarterback or wide receiver over the next, 4 to 5 months with the Falcons. Again, not saying that there's going to be the only picks, because cornerback and defensive end, edge rusher, whatever you want to call it, offensive tackle, I'm sure we'll get some attention. We'll get a lot of, because the Falcons got a lot of holes. But, it is one of those things where it is frustrating, where it's just like, even if they had picked different players, if you want to play that revisionist historian game that so many people love to play, like, they'd still probably be looking at getting more explosive, because, you just got to keep chipping away at that. But, it's very frustrating to watch this team, do the thing that they've done all year long, which is, once you think they've taken a step forward, the very next week they take, 2 steps back, if you want to say it there. And, that's going to lead to some major questions about this coaching staff and whether Arthur Blank is going to, cut ties with them after this week. But, they still got a shot to make the playoffs inexplicably, despite, just completely screwing the pooch, as they say. And I don't know if that's an appropriate thing to say, but that's what they've been doing these last couple of weeks. So we'll see if the Falcons continue to do that, or in how that affects Arthur Blank's decision making. But we'll break down sort of what Arthur Smith's job status is moving forward on today's Locked On Falcons. Now, guys, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports is Prize Picks. And now that basketball season is here, you can now enter into their specials league, where you can combine projections from different leagues, different sports. You want to combine NHL, NBA, college basketball, college football, NFL. It's all available on Prize Picks. And if you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250. And it's just easy. Just pick 2 or more players, pick more or less than their projected stats. And the more entries you make, the more money you can make, up to 25 times your money. All you got to do is go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL with promo code LockedOnNFL. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. So, guys, continuing today's episode, want to plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel, where you can get insight to all the leagues across all the sports here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, the first of its kind, Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel. Sorry, and check out the Locked On Sports Atlanta 24/7 streaming channel as well. So, clearly, I did not deliver on that promise for less coughing, man. COVID is doing its thing. But let's talk about Arthur Smith's job status. Over the weekend, we got another report from NFL networks, multiple NFL insiders, the Ian Rappaports, Tom Pelissero, etc., reporting over the weekend that Arthur Smith's job status is relatively safe. They were talking about multiple coaches, including Matt Eberflus in Chicago, talking about their job status. And, the way that they sort of broke it down was that we're probably not going to see that many coaching changes outside of the ones that are already available. is basically what they said. But after today's performance, Matt Eberflus certainly reaffirmed, potentially him keeping the job in Chicago. Arthur Smith did not do the same thing in Atlanta. And as I said earlier, um, you know, after last week, I was like 94% chance Arthur Smith is back next year. And that 6% chance was sort of the the leftovers, where it was like, well, there's a 6% chance that the Falcons could still lay an egg after this point, and I'd have to revise this. And of course, putting that number at only 6% was just foolish on my part, because we are now in that 6% chance where the Falcons laid an egg, and now we have to revise that number. And again, it's certainly not 94%. I still think it's probably greater than 50, but let's split the difference between 51 and 94%. And what is that, like 173 something percent, something like that. Let's go with 72% chance that Arthur Smith is back next week. And that's entirely dependent on kind of how the Falcons perform this upcoming Sunday against the Saints. Well, I think it's still likely that he keeps his job, right? And the Falcons, I don't quite know exactly how it works. I don't think it's a win and you're in situation, even if the Falcons beat the Saints next week, because I think, they would have the 8-9 tiebreaker over the Saints because they swept them. But if the Bucs win next week, they'll be 9-8. So they'll get in and win the division. And I have no idea how the wild card is going. I think a lot depends on what happens in this 4:00 game between the Steelers and Seahawks. As I'm recording, it's the fourth quarter. The Steelers are up. So as I'm sitting here talking, I guess the Falcons still have a extremely low outside probability of winning the 7 seed if certain things go their way. Like if Seattle loses, I don't know if the Rams and Seahawks are playing next week. Who knows at this point? But I don't know if it's going to depend on the Falcons winning next week or making the playoffs. I think it's going to depend on how they perform, right? It's going to be more about process than the results, right? And the reason I say that is because I think Arthur Blank wants to keep Arthur Smith. He's looking for any reason. And that was basically why last week I sat here on this podcast and said there's a 94% chance he's going to be back, because last week's game was, to me, that reason for Arthur Blank to justify, confusing my Arthurs. Sorry for going off these tangents, guys. I was just thinking about Arthur with the cartoon Arthur with the fist, the angry fist. that symbolizes all the Arthurs here in Atlanta, just angry fists all around. But Arthur the Aardvark, for those of you that don't know that reference. But anyway, what was I talking about? I completely lost my train of thought. I don't think Arthur Blank I think he's looking for any reason to keep Arthur Smith. And I thought last week's game was the reason he would need to do so. But then I feel like, this week's game completely negated that. And I don't think it's the fact that the Falcons lost to the Bears, right? You expected the Bears were favored. I went into this game thinking the Falcons would lose, but you thought they would be more competitive given that these were two evenly matched teams. We talked about it, right? We talked about it's like, okay, well, it's probably going to boil down to who the best quarterback is. We'll talk about Justin Fields and his performance later in the episode, and he clearly showed he was the better quarterback. I got to take my shots at Taylor Heineke, so I'll take my shots later in the episode on that. The Heineke hive is, the hive is dead, but sorry, I don't know, man. You gotta smile through the pain. But I do think ultimately Arthur Blank wants to keep Arthur Smith. Will he keep Arthur Smith? Who knows? If it was me, as I've said this before, what I think the Falcons is going to do is not what I would do, guys, right? But one of the things I try to do on this podcast is we talk about what the Falcons do, not about what I would do. This show is, even though I do have that ego, no, I don't. I'm so humble. But, it's not about what I would do. It's about what this team does and try to explain what is going on with the team. And I think we do a pretty good job of that, if I say so myself. I'm sure there will be 3 commenters that will disagree with that assessment. And they'll get like 24 likes. And I'm just like, how? But anyway, just like, clearly a lot of people that are not enjoying the show. But that's a me problem, guys. So we'll see how we figure that out in 2024. But I do think the Falcons want to keep Arthur Smith. Whether they should or not is a separate conversation. Again, as I've said before, if it hasn't been clear, if it was up to me, and I've basically said this since the Panther game, I would probably cut ties and just start over, right? That Arthur Smith's vision for this rebuild is not developing the way that I would like it to for a lot of the reasons that we've discussed all year long. And so I would probably just cut ties and start fresh. But I don't think Arthur Blank is going to make that choice, but we'll see, right? 3 years ago, I sat here utterly convinced going into that final game in 2019, or 4 years ago, I guess now, thinking that Dan Quinn was going to get fired. And then the word came out like the Friday before that. I think that was a finale against the Bucks where he was like, "Oh, Dan Quinn's coming back." So I was just like, okay. Like if you had asked me probably then, I probably would have said like 98% chance that Dan Quinn gets fired. So, we'll see how that changes and evolves over the next week or two. We still got Black Monday, but it is very like basically it's just like this is why you don't, because it's like every time, as I said before, you take progress, you take a step back. And it's just like if you had just gotten steady progress over the course of the season, if we had just gotten good play, like again, it's not to sit here and say that the Falcons would have finished, after the bye week 6-1 or anything like that. But if they had just consistently put their better foot forward, 5 out of these last 7 weeks, rather than just like 2 out of the last 6 so far. We'll see what they do next week against the Saints. Like you would feel so much better about Arthur Smith in this direction, or at least you could, whether you personally felt that better, you could at least understand, I get why Arthur Blank feels the way that he feels, even if I don't necessarily agree with him. You know what I'm saying? Like, but we have played 6 games since the bye week. And, all year long, I've been talking about it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And as I said, you got a really good performance against the Saints in week 12, right? And then you got a really good performance last week in week 16 against the Colts. And then it's just been bad, right? And then if you want to factor in the pre-bye stuff, those last 3 games prior to the bye. So you're looking at a situation, since the Falcons went 4-3 and, we're in first place in the division and seem like, okay, they're going to take care of business. You're looking at a team that's 3-6 since then. And unfortunately, like, all of those losses have been like really embarrassing losses. Arizona, Carolina, Tennessee, Minnesota, Tampa Bay, and it's just been very, very disappointing. Now the Bears is throwing this one as the 6th one. So that's why it feels so frustrating. And I completely understand why everybody is, out on Arthur Smith. As I've said before, I don't think all the Falcons' problems stem from Arthur Smith. I don't think it's as simple as, hey, if we just replace the coach, this team is going to be great or anything like that. Again, I think they have so many issues they got to solve. Quarterback, get more explosive on offense, figure out what's going on with the offensive line, improve this pass rush. And after today's game, the secondary that we've been touting as the strength of this defense, does not look like a strength anymore after what DJ Moore did to them today. So again, that's why, like, I sit here and I say, like, even if they do fire Arthur Smith, I don't think it solves all the team's problems. It solves one problem, and maybe, that starts a domino effect that solves other problems. But we'll just sort of have to see how that all plays out. But we'll wrap up today's episode having a conversation about that other big glaring problem beyond the coaching staff, that is the quarterback. And we'll talk about, what direction this team may be headed, and if Justin Fields, won his audition today. And we'll break that down to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, the weather is getting colder, but the NFL offers stay hot at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with a winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. It's an app that's super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So all you got to do is visit fanduel.com/lockedon, and you'll stay warm and cozy this winter, whether you're betting NFL, NBA, NHL, college basketball, college football, all that and more. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. So tomorrow, we will start the new year with a second pass of this game as usual. We'll see what emerges upon rewatch. But let's talk about the quarterback conversation, right? And let's talk about Justin Fields, right? As someone who was, anti-Fields, I guess you would categorize me, right? We live in this black and white world where you either like a player or you hate a player, right? Which is, we'll talk about the Heineke Hive in a second, but us anti-Fields people, let's embrace it. Or down bad today because he balled out today. Give him credit. Personally, I think he's only played well for like 4 games this year, but certainly this is going to add plenty of fuel to the fire for those people pushing for Fields to be acquired by the Atlanta Falcons as the solution to their quarterback problem this offseason. Let's talk about Heineke. Heineke did not ball today. The Heineke Hive took a major hit today. So I'm looking forward to not seeing those comments from the folks that are insisting that I'm just hating on Taylor Heineke for no reason. And if you missed the game, Taylor Heineke threw the hat trick of interceptions, right? As I said, I've been saying all year long, Heineke ain't protecting the football. We'll see what the film says, but this probably won't be Heineke's worst game. that Vikings game was atrocious. It'll probably be his second worst game, but we'll see. If there's any sort of redeemingness of Taylor Heineke. Obviously, the question is going to be who's going to start next week against the Saints. Arthur Smith said post game that Heineke did exit the game with about 4 minutes left. Desmond Ridder came in the game. He threw a pick. Got to keep the thing going. At least Ritter's excuse was he got hit his arm got hit as he was thrown, so that led to an underthrow. Heineke's excuses are he just made poor choices. But Arthur Smith said that Heineke exiting the game was more related to his injury, and apparently his ankle became more bothersome as the game wore on. His foot got stepped on that last drive he was in on, and that contributed to re-aggravating that injury. And when asked who's going to start next week, Arthur Smith basically said, we just got to figure out who's healthy. But, his comments were basically the assumption is the job is still Taylor Heineke's, but it will depend heavily on who's healthy. So again, that's another conversation about Arthur Smith with the quarterback carousel or musical chairs, as it's been often referred to over the last several weeks, 2 months. So that will be certainly a topic of discussion as the week unfolds. You guys know who I think they should start. And of course it's Logan Woodside at this point in time. So we'll see if I'm trying to think of a clever, plucky name for Woodside Hive, but I can't think of it. So, the Woodside stands, I guess, I don't know. We'll see if those people are going hard this week. So, it is your time to shine. So we'll see. But I stand by the previous statement I've made about the Falcons' future quarterback situation. The gut feeling I have, and I don't have any inside information on this, but just the vibes I get from covering this team. And as I've said, so humble, I think I cover this team better than anybody. I think if Arthur Smith is back, the Falcons would prefer a more proven option like a Kirk Cousins than a Justin Fields or someone like that. We'll see. Russell Wilson has created a lot of headlines in recent weeks. We'll see about that. I know Arthur Blank would love to have, Sierra and Russell Wilson, as a marketability thing. I don't know if Arthur Smith and company will vibe with Russell Wilson, given, he doesn't really fit the sort of play action, let's attack the middle of the field type of offense that he would like to run. But, certainly if Arthur Smith is out the door, that opens up the possibility of different alternative options at the quarterback position. But as far as I'm concerned, I think Kirk Cousins is kind of the perfect fit for what Arthur Smith, I think, is looking for in this offense. And I say that not because I think Kirk Cousins is a great option for the Falcons. There's real concerns about Kirk Cousins and how much he has left in the tank. But, I think it's fair to say that he's probably a safer bet at this point in time than a lot of these other options, just given the level of consistently top 10 to 12, top 15 play that we've gotten from Kirk Cousins for like 8 years in a row, So like that's kind of where I think if you're Arthur Smith, why you would lean in that direction. Not to mention he's a perfect fit in the play action heavy. Let's attack the middle of the field offense. Let's make smart decisions. Let's be, like he's everything that the Falcons wanted out of Desmond Ridder this year in their offense. That if the highest person on Desmond Ridder on the planet, what you thought Desmond Ridder could have been is basically what Kirk Cousins has been for like 8 years. That's why, to me, that's a marriage made in heaven. But I know, at least to the Locked On Falcons Discord, a lot of those people push back on that idea in the conversations we were having there, link in the description below, all week long, because they're convinced that, there will be a reunion between Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings. We'll see about that, right? There's a lot of moving parts there. So the quarterback conversation still remains to be concerned. That's going to be the big topic of conversation for the Falcons once we get into the offseason, after the topic of who's going to be the head coach gets answered. And we'll find out in about 8 days on whether or not, that's going to be Arthur Smith or somebody else. So, for the next 8 days, we'll talk about the head coach. And then for the next 80 days, we'll talk about the quarterback, right? That's basically how we'll break down. So we'll probably get a resolution to that quarterback conversation. Does that actually line up to be 80 days? Gets pretty close by mid-March. So yeah, that's probably about accurate. So 8 days about the coach, 80 days about the quarterback. So that will be the topic. We'll continue talking about this game and what went wrong for the Falcons, and maybe we'll find some things that went right for the Falcons. Tyler Algier had a 75-yard touchdown on a screen pass. Hey, Taylor Heineke and screens, man. Maybe we just run screens all game long next week against the Saints. So maybe that's the secret to our success, is run screens. But we'll break it down on Locked On Falcons. Continue to make us your first listen and first watch. Shout out to the everydayers. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta, their 24/7 streaming channel. Check out Locked On Sports Today's 24/7 streaming channel. Check out Locked On NFL if you want to get caught up on all the action around the NFL. I'm sure, I believe it's Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens who does the Monday show. So check that out. I'm sure Kevin has a better idea on what's going on with every team's playoff situation than I do. So that's worth checking out, but we'll probably discuss that as the week unfolds. And once that picture is a little bit clearer later on Sunday night. So that's going to do it for us, guys. Really appreciate it. I appreciate you guys sticking with me in 2023. I hope you continue to stick with me in 2024. I hope you have a happy new year. Go out, enjoy yourself, right? Just forget your troubles. Your New Year's resolution should be, I do not care about the Atlanta Falcons anymore. As I said, after the Panthers loss, psychologically, spiritually, I'm over the Atlanta Falcons. And that remains true to this day. And hopefully, as we enter a hellscape of a year that is every election year here in the U.S., I hope that you find some bright light in 2024. And, I don't think it's going to be the Atlanta Falcons, but hey, if that's what that's what your hope is, then do you. So that's going to do it for us, guys. Really appreciate it. Check out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On NFL. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.